Bipedalism. Creative.
Visual artwork is a great example of creativity.
Technology inventions. Yes, creative.
I think that's creative.
A really good movie is totally creative.
Storytelling and movies and myths are both creative and sustaining.
Getting a box and turning it into a spaceship or an airplane or a fort. Yeah, play is a totally creative act.
And they have dolphins using, it's like the sponges in Australia, playing with them as a toy. I mean, we don't give wildlife enough credit.
And so that is kind of inarguably some form of creativity. It's taking something and turning it into something else.
Medicine, I think that one is a yes, because our vaccines for COVID had to be created.
Languages are creative.
And I'm the same way with chefs. I cook, but like what they do is just like a miracle to me.
Music, acting, definitely creative.
Especially improv.
I think teaching is definitely creative.
I think creativity invites us to be a little wild about what it is that we're creating.
Does that answer your question?
I think so.
To create. It's what makes us separate, I think, in many ways. Other animals make things, certainly, but not to the degree that we have. Things that have use on a spiritual level, on a cultural level, things that tie us together to form bonds that have allowed civilizations to grow. Some were massive building projects. The cathedrals and great walls and things of that nature were massive building projects that employed people, but also they were things that gave a sense of national or communal identity.
It is essential that we create not only on a sustaining level, but that also we take that creative power and we propagate that into something that is enjoyable for ourselves.
100% creative. In my field, it'd be a little bit different. I deal with flavors and textures and ingredients and stuff like that. And even with my plating, it's like, I always try to make this analogy. It's like I'm layering flavors like I see paint on a wall, like graffiti, sharp edges, this and that and this.
It's absolutely creative. Finding a path to success, that's the creative part of my business. Anyone can follow a recipe, but every year is different in the wine world, and you plant these vines, it takes years before they come online, then you pick the fruit and you process it, and it's years before you bottle it, and then it's probably years after that before people open the bottle and taste your creation.
Creativity has been a fundamental cognitive process involved in problem solving and communication. But what is it that makes us pick up a tool like a pencil and mark a piece of paper with a drawing? Are we just marking our existence in a time and place? There are a few ways to look at creativity. We can look at it in a reductionist way, where very few people and very few activities would be considered creative. In this view, only physical works like a painting or sculpture are creative, or a few intangible works like a song. And only eminent geniuses would be considered creative, like Da Vinci or Van Gogh, Einstein or Stephen Hawking. Or we can look at creativity in an expansive way, where almost everything anyone does could be considered creative. Whenever we speak, think, or act, we're being creative. To explore creativity, I came up with questions that I asked a wide range of people, from creativity researchers and psychologists to creatives from all walks of life: visual artists, musicians, cooks, comedians, and filmmakers.
Oof.
Wow. I guess
I have no idea what creativity is.
Creativity is hard to define, obviously. I mean, you're trying to make a movie.
Creativity is taking nothing and turning it into something.
It's an impulse that just is endemic to humanity. There is no other way around it. You can't restrain it.
I love, graffiti. I'm a big graffiti guy. Before I was a chef, I was into graffiti.
Creativity is the way you can take existing ideas and reassemble them in new and interesting ways that other people might not think about doing.
It's a way to explore, ideas and thoughts. It's a way to communicate those explorations with other people.
For us, it's a lot of work. You have to know what you're doing. You have to, and that applies to art, photography, writing.
Creativity is something that the entire universe and the planet is constantly generating, involved with.
And creativity is at the root of everything.
Creativity is the source of every single new idea, every single new technology, every single guy who sits down and says, hey, I wonder what happens if that person's being creative.
In the broadest sense, creativity is just the will to bring things into existence, whether that's a building or a painting or a child or whatever.
Creativity to me is the ability to see a different future, one that doesn't exist yet.
It's very much a process that we undergo, right? So I feel like it's something that we're always practicing to become better at, something that we're constantly learning and trying to figure out.
I mean, to me, creativity you're kind of like an inventor. You're inventing material and thoughts and funny lines. It's all in here. It's a combination of my past, of my experiences, of my allowing to stay open.
It's a time machine, engaging with old ideas and making new ideas potentially, and then sharing them out with the future.
I think creativity is probably different for every single creative person. It's kind of a personal relationship with your imagination in ways, and in the same way that I think people have different relationships with, their religion or their faith or their God. Like, that's defined only by what it is to them, because it's internal. And I think that your relationship with your art is similarly internal, and it doesn't become external until you put it out there.
I think creativity is a force, a mysterious force that has some sort of desire. It's a sort of a desirous force. It moves us, it hits us.
I think a mystic definition of creativity would be the fullest flowering of the seeds of our divine essence as human beings.
Creativity comes from a very complex place that researchers are
only beginning to understand.
It is not that easy to understand. It is not that easy to assess. And it is not that easy to define.
Creativity is simply the production of novel and appropriate ideas.
Deep creativity is idiosyncratic, is archetypal, is alchemical, is responsive, is emotional, is healing. And I'll read one more. Deep creativity is aesthetic.
Making things based on the word poesis. Poesis usually is used to apply to making a text, right? Like a poem or a novel, but it can easily be applied to anything that is made.
So I think at a core, thousands of years ago, monkey brain level, right? There's got to be something that says crafting or making things can improve your life.
From the psychological perspective, we'd have to begin with the instinctual, and Jung had an idea about that. He actually talked about there being a creative instinct. It's a life force. There I see like a few key ingredients. One would be discipline, that the person who is creative has a kind of habitat, or they have a ritual, they have a kind of container. But at the opposite end of the spectrum, creativity also needs play, experimentation, room for movement. People who write about creativity talk about the need for humor. And I think the thing about play is the experimental quality and even the capacity to fail.
Creativity is capitalizing on failure. Really, failure is part of the creative process, and people who are creative know that we don't fear failure. We use failure as a stepping stone to success.
Let's look at some theories of creativity from the past and present.
I like Guilford, his 1967 definition. His model of creativity basically encompassed three things. Sensitivity to problems, that is, you have to have an ability to recognize that a problem is important, that needs to be solved. Fluency in whatever the relevant problem space is. You have to have skill and knowledge about the area. And then also flexibility. So cognitive flexibility, both adaptive and spontaneous. Sternberg's triarchic theory of intelligence posits that creativity is actually one of the three domains of cognitive ability. And the Cattell-Horn-Carroll theory also includes creativity as a subset of cognitive ability.
In his 1964 book, The Act of Creation, Arthur Koestler coined the term bisociation. Bisociation is the interaction between two different matrices of association. But what does that mean? In his book, Koestler looked at three domains of creativity to talk about what bisociation is: art, comedy, and science.
Comedy is creative.
Comedy is definitely creative.
Frustration and observation, frustration by things you've observed, is definitely a big thing of comedy. I love the science of comedy. Like, I love the science of a joke.
Comedians tell a story that sets up their joke, and everybody is expecting a certain outcome. That's the matrix of association that the joke begins with. Then the comedian comes in with the punchline, which is a different matrix of association. Those two matrices collide, and in that collision is the bisociation, the humor.
I mean, I think it's true. I think there's a contrast. You want to throw the audience off. You want to catch them off guard, whether it's a shock statement or something silly, unexpected. I think you have to have more than one thought to make it work. That makes sense.
For art, two matrices of association are juxtaposed, and out of that emerges the bisociation as an aesthetic experience.
Science is creative.
Creativity is not confined to the arts. If anything, if you're a good scientist, you're incredibly creative. And you're only a scientist if you are creating new knowledge.
Science creativity often comes from coloring outside the lines. and then writing about what happened.
And in science, two matrices of association are synthesized, leading to the bisociation of a new scientific theory. An example of this would be Einstein taking the differing notions of time and space and synthesizing them into the space-time continuum.
One aspect, I think, when you think of creativity, I think you tend to think, or well, I initially tend to think of the arts. I tend to think of, like painting and film and music. But there's also the creativity of the human mind that leads to like science discoveries. And I think one of the most interesting of those is like Albert Einstein, who would like create thought experiments for himself. From a creative point of view, he's trying to figure out the math problem by creating various scenarios in this world to help solve what would ultimately be like a math like problem that was ultimately resolved, and he was proven right.
Lots of times the mathematicians have created the solution to something in science, and then the mathematicians will come and tell the scientists like, all right, we already created the solution. We know we can prove that like this particle exists, or we can prove that there's this, dimension. Now you guys have to do the experiment to prove what math has already shown.
There is a Jungian principle of holding two disparate concepts at the same time, and something is revealed either between them or the merger of them or whatever you want to say.
The transcendent function seems to have to do with being able to hold that tension, to know that within yourself, or maybe just within life, there are these opposites to your conscious preferences. And that's what shakes things up.
Learn in your life to hold that tension of opposites and be patient. But if you can hold it long enough, inevitably will arise what Jung called the tertium quid, that third thing that can be terribly helpful in creating the psychic energy and having it move in the right direction.
It emerges from the notion of a sort of tension between polarities within the self that are in conflict with each other. That tension then generates energy to the point where a spontaneous new organization of the psyche emerges.
There's some freedom in liminal space, which I equate with sacred space, that instigates and stimulates whatever this creative impulse in me is hungry for.
Let's look at a few of the major theories about creativity.
So a traditional model was continues to be the 4P model of creativity, which is person, process, product, and press or place. Press is actually quite indicative of how many people think about the environment as something that kind of constrains you and presses you and pressures you into either creating or kind of stopping your creativity. So the 5A model came out of a frustration with how individualistic typical models of creativity are, in the sense that they focus us a lot on the person and the mind of the person, kind of in isolation from the rest. So how can we think in a more integral way of these elements, right? So I came up with this 5A model. I would think of the creative actor, the audience, the action, the artifacts, and the affordances. The creative actor is basically the person, right? But it can also be a group, it can also be a community. So who is the actor? Who is the kind of agent of creativity? The second, the audience. Every creator has an audience. Every creator needs to persuade others of his or her creativity, of what they're proposing, right? And we create for other people and with other people. So there are many various audiences that are involved. Action, so just not just the creative thinking, but acting or doing something in the world. When I say creative action, I mean a more integral view of thinking and making stuff creatively. Artifacts. Artifacts is a funny one because normally people think of museums, the artifact is something exhibited and so on. Actually, everything that is in a museum is a product of creativity, even if by now they're not new and original anymore, but they're a product of human creativity. At the same time, if you take the scribbles of a child on paper, that is a cultural artifact. They use culture to produce culture. So everything creative, the outcome of it, whether it's an idea or an object or a value or an institution, is an artifact. And finally, maybe the most peculiar one is affordances. So affordances refers to the materiality of creating, because we don't only create in the head, but we use what the environment gives us. So objects around us afford certain actions and don't afford others. If you have a broom, you can have a clean room. You can play with it and pretend you're somewhere in a magical place and so on. Or you cannot go to the physical moon with the help of a broom. So it has certain affordances, but not others. What we do when we create is basically we perceive new affordances in the objects around us. So creativity is basically, if I want to summarize with all the A's, if I see if I can manage, is basically creative actors engaging with a variety of audiences and engaging in a variety of actions that use new affordances and new possibilities of their environment in creating new and meaningful artifacts. There you go, the 5 A's of creativity.
I feel like anybody in the world can be creative in their own type of way, in regards to like their everyday life, like fashion statements.
Well, I believe that everybody's creative. I mean, you have to be.
Creativity often is seen as being what's called big C or little c, where big C is genius. That's Shakespeare and Mozart and Einstein, and little c is everyday creativity. And this is the creativity, again, you share with other people. It's a meal that you serve family and friends. It's a poem you read at a coffee house. And so we started by creating this category concept of mini C. And this idea that if you're creative in a way that's just for you, these little moments of aha or oh, what if? And these can happen when you're learning. It can happen when you're just taking a walk and all of a sudden, wait, what about this? We also added what we call pro C or expert creativity. Like again, if you're somebody who writes for fun, you send out your stories to some small magazines and eventually you get one accepted. You get a few more stories accepted, maybe you get a novel published by a small publisher. This counts, this means something. And so the goal of Pro C was to show this, again, this level, this category that you can become, aspire to, and that as researchers, we can study and kind of separate. So to a degree, the goal of the 4 C's was to show this kind of trajectory, this multi-category potential for growth.
I think creativity has a twin, which is called innovation.
So the componential model of creativity basically says that there are 3 components that any individual requires in order to produce creative work. First of all, expertise or skill in the domain where they're trying to do the creative work. Second is creative thinking skill. It includes not only the ability to take new perspectives on problems and be able to think in an open, associative way, but it also includes styles of working. The third component is the one that I've been most excited about throughout my career, and it's really what I've contributed through my research to our understanding of creativity, and that's the motivational component. You can have a lot of skill, a lot of expertise, you can know the creative thinking techniques, but if you're not motivated, you're not likely to produce any creative work. Or if your motivation is purely extrinsic, then you'll do just basically whatever you need to do to get that extrinsic reward, get paid, or meet the deadline or whatever. But there's an external component, a fourth component outside the person, and that's the environment. It's their workplace, their organization, their team, the environment created by their immediate supervisor, and everything around them. That organizational environment itself is composed of three components, and they have parallels to the components within the individual. So first of all, you can think of the organization's expertise as its resources of all kinds. The second component of the organization is kind of the parallel of individual creative skill, and that's the organization's resources around specifically supporting creativity. And the third is the motivational component, and that really draws on the leader's vision. Is this organization oriented toward really being an innovative leader or not? The fruit of the creative ideas that begin with individuals and small teams, the fruit is innovation. And that's just the implementation of creative ideas by an organization.
One of my books that I wrote with my daughter called The Creative Compass is structured around the 5 universal stages of creativity. First comes the dreaming phase. Dreaming is bringing it into reality. We have to come up with ideas, what we call a sticky idea that won't let us go. The next phase is drafting. Once it's drafted, comes the third and phase that most people skip over, which is the development phase, which is when we step back and say, is this creation what I had in mind? And then the fourth stage is refining, is polishing and making it ready. And finally, of course, the fifth stage is sharing. How do we bring our creativity out into the world?
That's actually a very deep philosophical question. Where does creativity come from?
Gosh, where does creativity come from? That is a...
I have no idea.
Well, my most honest answer is it's a complete mystery to me.
Where does it come from? Oh my goodness.
You can only go esoteric with that.
And I do think it comes from my childhood. I do feel like there's an inner child inside of me who's always wanted to play.
I think creativity comes from, like, in a lot of ways, not necessarily a desire to please other people, but a desire to share something of yourself with other people.
Yeah, I guess I create things to share them with the hope that it'll make someone happy, that they will be able to enjoy something that brought me joy while I was making it.
It comes from here. It comes from the heart.
It comes from the minds of individuals initially. It comes from their ability to play with ideas in an open way, to come up with new combinations of ideas, to imagine, and it comes from their motivation.
I have been called genius by like some really smart people, and it's like, really, you know, I'm a genius, like I'm a magician. You know, I've tricked people. That's what I do. I make illusions, you know, and it just seems like magic, you know, but that's a shamanistic side to thing. You know, you trick people.
The idea of creativity it's akin to the ancient concept of magic, because it is taking and creating something out of nothing. It's like the old sleight of hand piece where now you see it, now you don't, is put in reverse, where now you don't, now you see it. And that is, in my mind, what artists accomplish with creativity, is literally bringing something into the universe that did not exist before. Well, that's one way that we describe our deities, our gods. So in a sense,
It brings artists in relationship with the transcendent, with deities, with that which is larger than ourselves.
Inspiration comes from everywhere.
These ideas come on, we conceptualize them, we write them out, and we're like, oh wow, like it can come from anywhere, you know, whether it's the time of the year, whether it's an experience I had in New York, you know, or I had an experience here, or a memory. Yeah, it comes from everywhere. Yeah.
Inspiration is often fleeting. We always try to capitalize on those moments where inspiration is at its peak, because once it's gone, like, you never really know when you're gonna feel that spark again. Well, like when that inspiration hits or an idea comes to mind, there's this desire to see it come to fruition, like right then and there. It's almost like nothing else even matters in that moment, right? Like I have to get this down. I at least need to write it down or something so I don't forget.
Yeah, it's something that can be happening constantly, you know, it's something that can strike like a lightning bolt and sort of sweep you off your feet. Yeah, I love inspiration.
So I feel like inspiration pushes creativity.
It's funny because I think most people, if you talk about inspiration and creativity, they see it in terms of the arts, but really it applies to
everything. Yeah, I agree.
Creativity is it's something that you already have. It's something you've gained. It's part of your arsenal. Inspiration comes while you're like in the shower or sitting in traffic, or when you don't have a pen and paper to write it down. It's not fair. Inspiration is more of like a spirit that just moves through you, and like creativity is how well you can capture that or harness it or somehow document it as accurately as possible.
When you start talking about creativity, start realizing it's sort of omnipresent, a god or something that's sort of hanging around. And being an artist is a very intense thing. It's a very intense thing to be given, to be handed, to be charged with.
Like being a creative is as if you're visited by a god and they give you a lightning bolt and say, here, hold this for me.
Literally. I think it's part of the task of being a healthy artist is to be handed a lightning bolt and figure out how to contain that energy. Where does it live in your life, and how do you create some distance from it, or hold it out while you eat your eggs in the morning, you know, so that it's not burning you alive.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم.
God created us, and if someone believes in God, they think that he or she is the most creative being of all time. And I think, this is my own thinking, that he wanted us to feel how that feels to be a god. That's why we have this inner desire and inner need to be creative.
If you look at the history of creativity, it was often seen as divine, that the gods were the ones who created, and that people shouldn't even imagine or dream of creating. And it was a while until we kind of accepted, oh, well, people can do that too, that it's not defiant to create. Creation is something that can feel godlike.
And it goes back a long way, just to give you a mythological perspective on that. One of the oldest ideas of creativity, of course, comes from the Bible or ancient religions, where we talk about the beginning of the world and how the divinity or divinities in plural generated, this is the big paradigm of creation. It's the creation of the world. I mean, what can be more creative than that? But beside that, if you look at Greek mythology, you have this figure of Prometheus. Prometheus was a titan and who stole fire from the gods and gave it to mankind. Fire is this metaphor for the creative spark. Basically, what Prometheus did was to give something that was so divine and spread it towards human and say, well, you can use it. You can be your own creators from now on. I've given you fire, so you can do that.
Where does it come from? That maybe there's this magical process that somehow the muse speaks to us, or there is something in the ether that invades us and gives us provocation to move forward.
There's a distinction between the muse or the 9 muses, were the spirits that were supposed to deliver inspiration to poets and to artists. And so therefore what the artist or the writer who is inspired by the muses ends up producing is actually divinely inspired, because these were goddesses.
Now we're going to get a little esoteric and talk about something called the daemon. To Judeo-Christian ears, the word daemon may sound a lot like demon. And while they are linked etymologically, they're not the same thing, as Dr. Carden will explain.
To the ancient Greeks, the daimon was, in one common sense, just a name for the type of spirits that would inhabit local areas, like inhabit a temple or inhabit some shrine or some house or even a forest or something like that. There were the idea of elementals and spirits that many cultures have. Those were ancient Greek daimons. There arose over a very long period of time the idea of daimons in ancient Greece as spirits that were attached to the human soul. And when people were born, they had an accompanying spirit that was their particular daimon assigned by the gods, and the daimon held their life blueprint. The muse model still has inspiration for creative acts and creative works coming from the gods. As far as the ideas that come to you for creative work, that would be the muse influence, and the daimon would be what spurs a person.
So to me, this speaks to the kind of senex puer pattern that James Hillman underscored, the old and the new. They're two faces of the one archetypal configuration. So the puer has all the sort of spark of inspiration and so forth, but very often when it comes to realizing their vision or bringing it to fruition, they run out of juice. Now, I would say the daemon brings both. You're bringing in both of those elements. We can imagine it as the senex and the puer, or we could go back to what I said at the beginning, which is the discipline and the play.
So you need the puer for inspiration, but you need the senex to do the disciplined work.
The Greeks talked about daimons, and the Romans talked about the genius that sort of lived in an artist's studio.
The genius was the one who gave them inspiration and would help them with ideas.
Together, the utility of the demon muse model, in my opinion, for creatives is that it offloads creativity in a way that allows you to examine it and have a relationship with it. It objectifies it so that you don't, as Elizabeth Gilbert said in a very famous TED Talk, you don't become too inflated at the idea that, hey, this wonderful creation is coming from me. And on the other side, if you feel discouraged about it, you don't feel crushed. You don't take responsibility for being anything but the midwife or the shepherd of it.
Coming from the field of depth psychology, one has to point to the unconscious. I would say creativity comes from the archetypes.
It goes way deep. I mean, it's inside. It's a Russian doll's worth of consciousness. Further and further in you go.
And it seems to be that it was, probably born from becoming conscious, thinking creatures.
It's not forward in my consciousness, but it's backwards in my unconscious. It's definitely there, I can only assume that it's like the unconscious is trying to make sense of that which does not make sense. You've got to go into the jungle and appreciate what the jungle has to give you, and you can't complain about it. You can't say, I don't like the snakes, it's too hot.
So that to me is probably one of the missed pieces around creativity, that the creativity needs you to go back. It needs you to be able to dip into the well of the ancestors.
Where does our drive to tell stories come from, and where does our drive to make movies come from? And I think it comes out of that place of bringing order bringing order to the chaos of reality. I think creativity comes from this very human desire to make sense of the chaos.
And that's exactly what the creative person does. They venture into chaos and they form some sort of knowledge or some sort of order out of that chaos, and then they bring it back to the rest of us for us to enjoy in the known world.
I've always liked the idea of the Hindu god Shiva. There's the image of Shiva Nataraja, the lord of the dance. He's got a drum, he's holding fire, he's got a serpent wrapped around his arm, he has multiple arms, he's wreathed in flame. That image, to me, it looks chaotic and there's a lot of things going on, but he's also dancing, so it's choreographed. There's structure there. So it holds that tension between chaos and order. So what about genetics and evolution? Is that where our creativity comes from?
I'm the product of over 500 years of bagel makers in Poland. Actually, everybody in my family, including me, had at the very least worked in one of the family restaurants, or bakeries or delis, etc. So you take a look even at me and you say, hey, this guy's making software and software companies, and it's not related at all. But then you look at all the inventions that I end up creating that become valuable, and you'll see that they're all in the restaurant business.
The processes of creativity generate evolution.
The creativity is like it's a gift that we were given through our evolution that kind of helped us surpass any other species in the world.
Proximally, it comes from the mind and the brain, and more distally, it comes from our genes, our environment, and our evolution. Yeah, it would make sense that a survival advantage would be conferred onto people who were better able to come up with creative solutions to things like tool making and tool use and hunting animals and finding and gathering food, building shelters, and so on.
One of the things that was sort of a shortcoming in Darwin's theory of evolution is to try to explain the origins of human creativity. A lot of human creativity is totally non-functional. It's totally non-adaptive, like singing and writing poetry and doing art. So he tried to explain that, and he came up with the concept of sexual selection, where a lot of times what we are trying to do is attract mates. And the way we attract mates is through creativity of various forms.
It explains partly why we see the high heritability of abilities and talents, but also a reproductive advantage, more likely than not, which also is a huge factor in evolution, because we certainly find creativity sexy today, and I'm sure that our hominid ancestors probably did too, to some extent.
Creativity comes from the other side. It comes from the wine dark sea. It's like the intangible tangible.
Honestly, I feel like it comes from like the unknown, but also the known at the same time. I feel like it comes from being curious as well, and like not always wanting to do the same things all the time. Sometimes you're just like, you get creative. Like, people like, I'm bored, I want to do something creative.
Creative people are often novelty seeking. So they're seeking out things they don't know that much about.
Another aspect of creativity, and it has also an interesting connection with sexual selection, is novelty seeking. And that is one of the most highly characteristic of human beings in general, but particularly characteristic of highly creative people. And this is an incredible desire and curiosity to find out new things, to explore new environments. One of the personality dimensions that is the best predictor of creativity is something called openness to experience. Wanting to try out new foods, want to visit new nations, maybe learn new languages, explore new religions. So this is extremely important when it comes to understanding creativity.
When it gets down to it, I feel like a lot of the most creative things in the world are derived out of need.
Some people seem to have an innate need to create things rather than just taking what's around them in the world already. Some people are just the ones who want to and need to do something different.
I think creativity is interesting because it's something that, in my mind, usually spawns from either boredom or curiosity.
Boredom is a frustration drive. You want to be doing something. It's the wanting to be doing something and not having anything to do that makes the kids think up the cool games.
You learn so many important skills in life, in relationships, in work, and all of those things by figuring out how to solve the problems that adversity brings to you.
Yeah, there is that idea that without some sort of desperation, you won't be able to craft something as powerful or impactful. Drawing from that idea of the suffering artist. Suffering for your art means that you have to go through something to get something out of it.
In general, there's this adage that necessity is the mother of invention. Necessity is a fear drive. If you put it a different way and you say frustration is the mother of invention, frustration is a blocked goal drive. You're not going to die if you don't get that, promotion or the girl or whatever, but you're going to be really, really frustrated. And that is probably the mother of invention. Fear is just, there's so many ways in which it's bad for creativity.
Some people think creativity is connected to people being crazy or madness. I think really it comes down to just a different way of thinking. Everybody is aware of different types of neurodivergent thinking these days, whereas some people are really good at mathematical or financial concepts. Other people are good at putting information together in unique ways and coming with creative things.
Now let's take a look at cognition.
Pretty much all animals that can move around and do things, there's two drive systems that are kind of separate in the brain. And that's approach drive towards something that you want. And then there's fear drive where you're going away from something you don't want. Those are not only kind of spatially separate in the brain, but they involve different chemicals. For instance, fear drive tends to be a low serotonin state, but goal drive, like when you're interested in something, it's much more dopamine. And, we're all familiar with people who talk about exercise and dopamine, and things that decrease dopamine make people less creative.
What about the right brain, left brain stuff we hear about all the time?
Engaging in creativity, particularly in a musical or a visual form, can shift us from a left brain perception to a right brain perception.
The right brain, left brain model is known as the hemispheric lateralization model, which is very outdated because
there's really not that much evidence for it. There's some pretty good studies that show that creative people use their whole brains.
Creativity is a whole brain process.
It also has a very biased idea of what creativity includes, which is like all nonverbal, because what about writers?
So where in the brain does creativity come from exactly?
The parts that seem to be most important are the ones that are controlling positive drive, and that's the dopaminergic system. You can think of it in a sort of a three-part way. So there's the motivation that's coming from the midbrain. It's kind of the middle of the brain going up towards cortex. Then there's the part of the brain in the frontal lobes that's adapted for doing stuff. And that's very important for creativity. And then there's the back part of your cortex, which is much more involved in perceiving and judging, especially the temporal lobe.
And so psychologists have tried capturing creativity as divergent thinking.
So divergent thinking plays a very, very important role in creativity. Divergent thinking is essentially the capacity to generate lots of alternative ideas in response to a particular situation. And the more divergent, the better. And one of the classic measures that's used of divergent thinking is to ask people to give how many different uses for a paperclip.
And sometimes my most creative thoughts are when I'm doing nothing, because I'm not doing anything. I'm just being and allowing, and things are just coming in.
Let go. Don't worry about the world. Be here, be in the moment, and kind of just have fun.
So my subconscious had done a huge bit of work that I allowed myself to trust. That's completely fascinating to me, because it's almost like there's a whole conscious other part of you, you know, that's thinking independently, that's capable of making totally fictional creative leaps.
And it incubates, and the psyche is working it. And then if you come back, you find that it's been worked on, that the psyche is autonomous. It has a life of its own.
Now, many people have filters that block out these ideas. So what we want to do is loosen these filters a little bit and open our minds to be ready for these ideas to come to us. Maybe when you're in the shower or you're taking a long walk in nature, that your best ideas come to you. So this is called cognitive disinhibition.
Cognitive disinhibition plays a very important role in creativity. Interestingly, it basically involves an incapacity to filter out extraneous information. So there's actually been some interesting research on cognitive disinhibition. And what they find is, first of all, it is positively correlated with creativity. People who are highly creative are less likely to filter out extraneous information.
Because what's happening then is your mind is becoming defocused, and your mind is becoming more open to sensory information.
Highly creative people do not have very rigid categorizations. They don't separate things out, that they're constantly finding connections between things. This is sometimes called elusive thinking, but they'll often associate things that people say, those things don't even connect. They don't even belong together. But what the creative person will do is say, well, let's just go ahead and see what happens if we put these two things together.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be different for every person.
Wow, that's a good question. I'm not quite sure I know the answer to that.
Nobody knows. It's instinctive. It's like asking a bird, why does it make a nest?
I do it because I have to. There's just nothing else I want to do.
That's the way in which we express our human agency, I think.
If we stop creating, we die.
People who are creative can't not create. We just create until the day we die.
I think deep creativity satisfies a hunger to engage life more deeply than our busy everyday realities encourage, much less even allow for.
So we have almost this natural need to leave a mark on the world and to put something of ourselves in the world.
But like I always say, that painting is a very, very, very therapeutic process for me. There's something about, applying paint to canvas that just, it's very soothing. So I think it's something that, can also just make us feel good.
I think one of the reasons that I wanted to create the film was it gave me an opportunity to do something with my son. And I'm glad we did.
It went okay, I guess.
But in terms of us being artists and creatives in society, it's also our job to hold up a mirror to society.
And then we create as a way of praise and celebration. Through the act of creativity, you can also touch into the numinous and have a transcendent experience. Flow of entering a sort of mystic consciousness while you're in the middle of something that feels like artistic play.
When we create, I think we're participating in that original first line of Genesis. And if we stay with the myth, we create something of God's image and likeness in the achievement of our creativity.
And say we create because the cosmos is creative, or God or the gods are creative, and we are the imago Dei, and so we have this urge to create. It just built into us.
In his book, Memories, Dreams, Reflections, Carl Jung talks about the fact that humans are the secondary creators that give meaning to the creation.
Everybody creates something. And whether it's creating a family, whether it's creating an LP, or in my case, a software company, everybody creates something.
We create the same reason that we reproduce and have, kids sexually, rather than just budding off and producing a lot of people that look exactly like us, that on average in a changing environment, there needs to be some variation.
We create so that we can continue to grow as a species, as a civilization.
The initial spark of creativity was the intent to react to our surroundings, to figure out how to eat and provide shelter and provide for our loved ones.
This is why art, creativity, what have you, prevails, is because ingrained in the DNA of a creator is a survivor.
We are creating to live. We are creating to survive. And if you look at this, pandemic that we're, going through, people use creativity to just simply survive. Like if you look at restaurants or education in schools, they were creative to keep those things open, to keep those things going.
And it's part of being human.
I don't think human beings would evolve if we didn't create.
Our brains are literally creativity machines. The way we have survived is through our human ingenuity.
But the concept that you're constantly combining these things as part of the creative process to make ourselves better and make ourselves have meaning, I think, is ultimately what's most important.
At least my personal goal is I make things to help people feel less alone.
I think creativity, it's like a way for everyone. It's like a message that everyone can understand. Like art is something everyone can understand their own way, no matter where you come from in the world. And I think this is a way to help us connect with each other.
I want to make a contribution. I want to influence people in a positive way.
There's a concept called symbolic mortality, which is kind of an amazing concept where we're going to die. You're going to die. I'm going to die. How do we conquer this? And there's a couple of different pathways, and they're not all creativity, of course. I mean, having kids is one, but creativity is a pretty big one. The idea that you are going to create something that lives on.
I think that we do it, as I say, to kind of explain ourselves to ourselves and to others.
I think we create because of a yearning for adventure, to enter the woods where there's no path to follow.
So I think it comes from a desire to understand and order the world around you, but also a desire to communicate that to other people and find some commonality.
We are engaged in a conversation with ourselves and the rest of our culture, stretching back and going forward with what things mean, who we are, what we aspire to, what we value, what we believe.
That's, I think, what good art is able to do, is generate emotions out of nothing, basically, especially as a filmmaker, because at the end of the day with a movie, it's all about what the audience is feeling and all about how do I use every single element at my disposal to get the audience to feel fear or happiness or longing or desire or what have you. It's all about generating those emotions.
It is neutral. To bring something into the world, we can create in the positive or we can create in the negative. Why some people create more in the negative and some in the positive, I'll leave that to the philosophers and psychologists.
Creativity comes with a downside.
At this point, we're going to look at the dark side of creativity, such as when an idea won't leave you alone.
And then the creative juices just, sometimes they're insidious. They won't leave me alone. I feel like I'm haunted.
The energy will not let up until the thing is made.
Traditionally, creativity is thought of as a benevolent and positive force. Dark creativity is a more recent understanding of the dark side of creativity. Dark creativity is the study of how people get good ideas to do bad things.
Creative people are people who see things that other people don't see. And there you can see a lot of room for wrongdoings, like cheating, like gaming the system.
It is the use of the creative process, but for malevolent or nefarious or negative or self-interested purposes. Simple example could be finding a new way to evade your taxes. The dark triad or tetrad consists of these negative personality characteristics, socially undesirable, and traits that are very frequently studied in, say, organizational literature, applied to people in positions of leadership, conceptualized in around early 2000s, consisted of subclinical narcissism. So it is a narcissistic personality disorder in that sense. It isn't a clinical disorder, but it is still a trait of narcissism. The second component was psychopathy. So things like characteristics like emotional callousness, self-interested behavior, and lack of empathy would come under psychopathy. And the third trait in that triad was Machiavellianism. So manipulating other people for your own benefit, for your own needs. More recently, in the late 2000s, what happened was that we added on a fourth trait because three weren't enough. And the fourth trait was everyday sadism. Even trolling people online or making fun of people's appearances online and things like that, that could be considered within that trait.
When we think about positive creativity, as I was just saying, that seems to have something to do with the additive, the bringing into. When I look at what people are writing about malevolent creativity, it seems to me that it's all about subtraction. It's about taking something away. And maybe it's because the malevolent creative doesn't have much soul. There's a lack of a core of the personality.
The more malevolently creative you are, the more darkly creative your actions are, the less likely you have any kind of regard for any moralities.
Creativity, it heals people. It saves things that need to be saved. And it destroys when it needs to destroy.
It can become destructive.
Archetypally, the creative is opposed by the destructive.
I wish there was a word like creativity, destructivity, that where it's, it's an action, it's an active process. That too is regenerative.
What D.H. Lawrence called creative destruction, where some old structure, whether it be psychological or social or political, or collapses, disintegrates. People have a meltdown, and out of that process of disintegration, there seems to be a kind of activation of deeper energies within the psyche that facilitate the reemergence of a new kind of form from the broken, shattered pieces of the structure.
That very often in the seeds of destruction, just like in the seeds of a fire, there actually are seeds of renewal and new life.
No, creative people aren't mad.
I think you have to be kind of crazy to be creative. Absolutely.
I think it's one of the most misleading, damaging things that people think about creativity. And
are they mad? Oh my goodness. Some of them sure are, that's for sure. Most of them are at least a little neurotic. I include myself in that.
I think that creative people tend to be different. They tend to look at the world a different way.
Oh, yes. But that's a really fun thing. So I think creative people are crazy in the sense that they are disruptive and they make people uncomfortable often, because when we do something outside of the norm, it can throw us off of our normal balance.
I don't think you have to be crazy to be creative. And I don't think if you're creative, you're crazy. I think it's correlational, it's not causational.
Usually I think that just means they think differently or see things differently through a different lens with different background than you or whatever group you might subscribe to.
Yes. There's nothing wrong with being mad. I think being mad frees you up from the constraints of society. I think it's good to be mad.
Maybe.
And sometimes it threatens people that don't like stepping out of the box. But no, I would be proud to say that we're both a little mad.
I would say, are creative people mad? No, but it helps. Probably a little bit.
I think so, in a good way. I mean, crazy has such a negative connotation, but crazy can be fun too. Like, my boyfriend's a writer for TV and he calls me crazy. And I'm like, you're crazy.
Not crazy, just thinking differently.
Yeah, I think creativity does kind of require, insanity is kind of a prerequisite for creativity.
I think we're highly functional crazies, is what I'd call us. Oftentimes they were creative and were kind of managing, a brain that was firing off all over the place. Even my son immediately is able to, he has kind of that. And my daughter also, like, I'm kind of realizing they both are, when they hear about at school different ways that brains work, when they talk about being on the spectrum in some way, or all these ways that the brain works, it'll almost be a relief to them, because they're like, oh yeah, well sometimes I'm kind of all over the place, and it's nice to know that there's other people who can find a way to completely function in the world while having a brain that doesn't necessarily go from like A to B to C to D all the time.
That's funny, because something like, am I crazy? I feel like maybe a little. I don't know. I feel like maybe a little.
I'm bipolar, and that's my superpower in that, like, I don't get depressed that much, but I can just like power out, So among other things, I'm ADD and OCD, and like a lot of bipolar people, alcoholic. And all of a sudden it dawned on me, am I different? I don't think like other people. A lot of other people that I know. Some I do, and then you click with them. And it's almost like telepathic. You don't even have to, finish sentences and they know what you're talking about.
To me, creativity has such body. Like, when you get inspired by something, you are filled with it. And it's completely in the body, and it can drive you crazy.
No, creative people are not mad, but then that sort of begs the definition of what is mad. What is madness? What is insanity?
I think madness depends on what the cultural context is. Madness is a relative term.
Crazy is it's a value judgment that other people place. Very often crazy people are people who are doing things in a way that other people either discounted, said, that'll never work, without ever trying it to see if it would work, or they are just working outside societal norms in some fashion, and they're labeled crazy.
If our society, which is putting that image on creativity and creative people as being mad or crazy, that concept of locking out creativity as a separate realm from the rest of life is maybe unhealthy.
So where does this idea of creative people being mad come from in the first place? Let's take a look at a few ideas.
It's a very old myth. There is no science whatsoever behind it. It's a big bunch of hooey. However, it's very popular, and everybody thinks it's already been proved somewhere, and that it's a given. But what I did was I've spent the last 40 years tracking this stupid thing, and it goes all the way back to Plato, who used the term divine madness. Remember when you were inspired, he didn't mean clinical madness. He didn't mean psychopathology. He literally meant that the gods would visit, shake you around for a little bit, and then you'd produce a poem usually, and then they'd go away. And you never knew when they would come back. It was not an inherent ongoing part of the person, which is where we have come to.
I've sort of worked through my own craziness around being an artist, being possessed by making work.
When a creative person isn't really being as creative, they fall into melancholia, as seen in this print by Albrecht Dürer. And then eventually, when that's over, they have the euphoria and the burst of inspiration.
Creative people have this ability to kind of dive down below the surface and gather those kind of treasures that are below the surface while still having a hold of that lifeline. And so they can pull themselves back to the surface of conscious awareness, which is conscious, deliberate thought. And what separates the person who's the creative person from the psychotic person is the psychotic person doesn't have that lifeline.
What is often overlooked in how this myth, which has no science behind it, none, how it gets spread, are the creative people themselves act like they're nuts or refuse to be neat or refuse to show up for the party or refuse to do the laundry or what can you expect of me? I'm a genius. You know, they use it. And the same Steve Allen used to call it the bohemian excuse.
But I would say that's actually more the exception than the rule. We can, cherry pick people from history who were either drug addicts or alcoholics, and they were also very creative. But there are just as many people like myself who live very stable lives, aren't particularly crazy from any particular angle, but also manage to create.
I think the idea of creative people as being crazy is similar to the newspaper adage, if it bleeds, it leads. Things that are more violent and crazy, people are going to read those articles. They're going to read that newspaper. And to my mind, that kind of comes out of Vincent van Gogh and Claude Monet, the guy who painted lilies. Everybody focuses on Vincent van Gogh because he wasn't famous when he was alive. He was a little bit crazy. He did cut his ear off. He did shoot himself. These kinds of things. But Monet was wildly famous and wealthy in his own lifetime. He had a good marriage. He had a family with many children. He had a mansion north of Paris with gardens that he would paint. He was very famous and very well off. But we don't focus on him, we focus on Van Gogh.
There was a paper in 1987, I believe, that found a higher rate of mood disorders, most particularly bipolar disorder, in prominent writers. Autism autism spectrum disorders are also somewhat associated with creative achievement. Of course, none of this means that all creative people are prone to psychopathology, or that all people who suffer from mental illness have the capacity to be creative.
There was this really great study that was done at UC Berkeley, and they gave them this test. It's called the MMPI. It's a standard test that measures the level of symptoms that you have in various pathological categories, like depression, schizophrenia. As expected, the people who were normal were just at the bottom. They showed very few symptoms of depression or, whatever it happened to be. And then, of course, the people who were obviously mentally ill, incapacitated, scored very, very high. And then the interesting thing is the two groups in between. The highly creative people scored very similar to the mentally ill people, but just below them, at what's called subclinical levels. And then the less creative people, like their colleagues working in the same architectural firm, but not famous, they scored somewhere in between the highly creative and the normals. Of course, it's kind of hard to tease out how much of this is sort of the chicken egg problem. Are people mentally ill because they go into creative occupations? Because creative occupations are highly stressful. You get a lot of rejections. You put a lot of effort in for nothing, a lot of criticism. Or is it that people who are attracted to creative domains tend to have a tendency towards mental illness? So we don't know for sure, and it's probably an interaction between the two.
And I do think there is some sort of a correlation. I wonder often if that has something to do with it. I know I struggle with it. I've had clinical depression. I still have to work with. I'll always be working with it. When I was taking antidepressants, it suppressed the depression, but it also suppressed the joy. So it sort of killed creativity. It made everything grey, and it felt like I didn't have the faculty anymore.
There's also so much projection coming at artists from the collective that says that artists are mad because they're different.
There's a feeling that creative work isn't specifically useful. Like, why would someone commit their life to doing something that's not objectively useful? And damn it, they're making a living doing that. That's not fair. And that is a really great dismissive thing to say as an accountant who deep down wishes that they were actually doing something that like set their soul on fire.
But one thing that I think is the main motivation, it levels the playing field. If you think that you wish you could play like this guy, you wish you could draw like this guy, you wish it, but you don't have to wish it because he's so screwed up. So if you had his talent, you would have his problems. So you're better off. And to say that all the art in the world came from madness, that you had to be mad to make all this beauty, I think that's so insulting.
There are some aspects of certain types of psychopathology, in particular on the bipolar spectrum and the psychosis proneness spectrum, and even on the addiction spectrum, that enhance creativity. And I think that's why we see this overlap.
The two camps seem to be the stigma of creative people are crazy on one side, and on the other, creatives themselves are like, whoa, hold on, I would be crazy if I didn't create. That's my escape, that's my psychological outlet. For me, creating is a completely meditative process.
When we engage in creative activity and creative work, that it elevates our mood, it reduces and helps us to manage stress and anxiety. So people engage in creative activity for their own mental health.
At this point, I think it's important to look at a different aspect of creativity in psychology, which is creativity as therapy. Many creatives have used art as a type of self-therapy for whatever it is they're going through. There's artist Nina Paley, whose 2008 film Sita Sings the Blues is about the tortured marriage of the gods Sita and Rama, with a seemingly cathartic parallel story about the breakdown of Paley's own marriage. And then there's the story of Mark Hogenkamp, who, after being savagely attacked in the year 2000, was discharged with brain damage and little memory of his life. Because he was unable to afford therapy, he used action figures and photography to create the miniature town of Marwincall, to help himself through his painful experience and to create memories.
Where my unconscious interest lies in terms of my art is as a therapy to these traumatic times, you know.
I'm sure there's people who've created from a place of trauma, from a place of even anxiety, like all of the things, all the emotional gauntlets that we have to run in our lives. People find outlets for those different things, and if you can find if creativity is a viable outlet for you and you can find it early in your life, it probably can in some cases, lead you away from finding the wrong outlet. It's very much a vent of pressure release for people.
I know very specifically why I started creating. I had some trauma as a child, right? My dad died when I was really young, and partly because of that, and partly because of how I'm wired, I was a very lonely and depressed kid. Sad, lonely, depressed, and felt like no one understood me. And having my dad die certainly helped make me feel further away from everybody else and different. But I remember so specifically hearing music that spoke to me in a way that I didn't feel alone in the world. It was close enough to being about a father and son and a dialogue between a father and son that it just cracked me open and made me feel less alone in the world and made me feel some connection, right? And some transcendence of myself and some hope that I can feel better.
Well, creativity for me generally means storytelling with comics, which involves a lot of drawing and focusing on what I'm doing. And it's a very Zen-like experience. The world outside goes away. It's actual happiness. I'm in that state, and it's such a single focus that it's joyous.
So art and that creative piece, I think, brings comfort to people. It just makes you smile. So I think creativity can soothe anxiety and yeah.
And then there is the Beethovenian path and the Dante path, which is the, creating because you're in agony, and it's the alchemical way to transmute your suffering and your sorrow and to find a pathway through to take away the anguish of what you are living in the world, and that can be the only medicine.
I used to create as a way to escape my situation. I used to create to pretend like everything around me didn't exist for a little bit, or just because it makes them happy,
There are some small connections with a few things like anxiety or a few what are called subclinical disorders, but it's small. And what's much more striking to me is the way creativity is connected to healing, resilience. Like, creative people are like anybody else, and creativity is a source of meaning, happiness, joy, connection.
I think we create because of our internal nature, if I may, or the need to express ourselves. I think every person has this need that is very tied to their psychological health and well-being.
I'm somebody who actually didn't have a lot of experience with depression or that level of sadness in my life until a couple years ago. I lost a very high-profile job, and when it happened, and because it was creativity bound, I did descend into a place where I needed something therapeutic to get me out of it. And what ultimately did was doing something creative. I made a short film, for Jurassic, and it was this family in a trailer that we got to see dinosaurs, and it's the stuff that we all love watching and love doing if we're filmmakers. And so being able to throw myself into something creative and kind of remind myself what I love about this in the first place was extraordinarily therapeutic. And then even making Jurassic World Dominion, the movie we just finished, very therapeutic.
The last body of work that I did, it's centered around the notion of toxic masculinity. It prompted me to do a few things. One, just to do my own research on the topic, and then also just confront my own experiences where toxic masculinity has occurred and just really process those things, right? And so after having undergone that process and the things that I was able to learn about myself after completing that series, now I am inspired to just continue to dig a little deeper into my past and some of the lessons that I've learned, and see just what new things I can uncover, and just keep on trying to discover a greater sense of self and ensure that I am whole as a person.
I mean, because I feel like it calms me down when I'm painting, so I feel like it's very much the opposite effect, and it's kind of like I get into a flow state, and that's definitely the best state. Art has helped me so much, just, you know, through like working out my own thoughts.
I know a lot of people who are or used to be afraid of therapy because they were worried it would tarnish their creative juices, because it would like clean up whatever tragic thoughts they had, which isn't true at all. You know, therapy, if anything, it opens you up and you find more nuggets of gold that you can use in your material and stand-up.
The people who can go into the deep and bring something beautiful out through their creative practice often soothe lots and lots of other people too.
Something that came out of my work on this film is suffering. The suffering that creatives go through for their creations.
The suffering and
suffering.
The suffering artist.
Enough suffering.
Polar as well as suffering.
I don't suffer if I'm not.
But suffering does bring us to deeper understandings at the same time.
Ray Bradbury said, pursue what you love, and, fuck the rest of the world. Follow your bliss, or, and then it turned into the 90s, I think someplace was follow your passion. So I looked up the word passion in the dictionary, and it comes from the Latin patai, which means to suffer, like Christ on the cross.
Then I started hearing everybody talk about passion.
On a passion project like our film.
Ideally, their passion.
These passions within them.
You create because of a passion and intrinsic.
But what does that have to do with the future, which is our next topic? As automation increases, menial, blue-collar jobs are going away one by one. They're becoming non-menial jobs nowadays. They're introducing robot cashiers and even robot doctors. So eventually the only thing left will be creative jobs, passion jobs. There are even economists writing about the death of the current gig economy, which will give way to the passion economy, where everybody will have a creative job.
I've seen some articles that talked about creativity being the most important skill of the 21st century. We are living in an ever-changing world, and we are dealing with unexpected problems, and we need people who can be creative.
It's all we got. It's the only arrow in our quiver.
It's going to be critical to our survival.
Our future will only be a product of our creativity.
Oh boy, we really need human creativity to be able to help us, that is humanity and the planet writ large in the future.
I think we're going to have to get the most creative minds together to help solve these problems.
It's our only way out of the corner we've painted ourselves into.
Something's got to change, and that's going to require a tremendous amount of creativity.
The creative person is looking toward how things could be, or as opposed to making sure we maintain the way things have always been.
Creativity advances forward. We keep innovating. We keep figuring out ways to make our lives better and make the human experience better.
But I think that there is a possibility that we as a species will evolve into a new iteration. We are designing technologies with biotechnology and computer sciences that are going to allow us to change what we are.
I'm optimistic. Like, as a species,
we've invented our way out of some very serious problems, and many of them of our own making.
I'm cautiously optimistic. I think that humans are too dogged and refuse to give up, and that I'm sure there will be a lot of blood, sweat, and tears in the process, but I think we'll get through, and I think we'll start to roll back some of the damage that we've done.
I think as a species, we've been very creative in getting to this point, but we've done a lot of collateral damage. And so now we have to be creative to figure out how to continue this progress without the whole thing going to hell. Like we're at a critical point here where it's not sustainable.
Many people feel we're entering what they call the long dark, and that particularly with the climate catastrophe and what we've been through this past year.
According to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, we are experiencing a climate change emergency. And a big part of that is that we have both long-term and short-term air pollutants that are heating up the world's climate. And the long-term pollutants, we don't really feel the effect of those right away. They can take 300 to 1,000 years to come out of the climate.
With that kind of heat rise, we're seeing melting ice, reduced permafrost, and warming and acidifying oceans. We're experiencing more extreme and intense heat waves. We're experiencing a more amplified water cycle, which means more extreme rainfall and flooding, and also more extreme periods of drought. With more dryness, we're also experiencing more wildfires and effects on agriculture and our food supply. Let's get a little esoteric again. People say a dichotomy between modern, organized religions and paganism, but the two do have connections that many people either forget or don't know about. I think most people know about the Greek goddess Gaia, who was the earth. Indian mythology has a similar goddess who was the earth, named Bhumi. Having the earth be a literal deity may seem strange to Western ears, but it's still there in the Abrahamic faiths, albeit buried. Many ancient cultures, such as Greek and Hebrew, had numerology, the study of the numerical value of letters and words. Remember the number of the beast? That's numerology. In Hebrew numerology, every letter equals a number, so every word has a numerical value. In the Bible, the God of Israel is called Elohim. Elohim's value is 86. The connection is that the Hebrew word for nature, hateva, has the same value, 86. Well, according to numerology, if two words have the same value, then they are equated. They are the same thing. So according to the ancient Hebrew numerology called gematria, Elohim and hateva are the same thing. God and nature are the same thing. This of course adds new meaning to many biblical verses, such as the opening lines of Genesis. That also adds more meaning to the fact that we humans are currently destroying the earth. In essence, we're destroying God. Something to think about. So what can be done to combat climate change?
One of the things that there's a lot of debate around is individual action versus collective action. Individual action can add up if we collectively are changing our culture and the way that we relate to material things and to energy and transportation. Collective action is a big part. Voting, protesting, producing media that influences the way we think about these challenges are really important.
Everything changes when technology changes. Everything.
And so I think that the creative thinkers who understand enough about science coming up with new ideas are going to let us clear our oceans and things that are happening right now. The guy who's out, cleaning up the garbage patch. That started as just, he probably woke up from a dream, and had an idea.
Physicist and engineer Klaus Lackner from Arizona State University has been working with a company called Carbon Collect to remove carbon from the air using a mechanical tree, which can capture carbon 1,000 times the rate of a natural tree. What about after we've fixed climate change? We should fix the Earth, yes, but we should also go out into space.
We will want to go out there. We're curious creatures, always have been. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when, or it's not a matter of should we, but we will.
What you really want is sort of like risk takers. You want
a population that has a few risk takers that can go find new things and maybe die at the attempt. And then you want a lot of people that are just kind of content to do what they're doing.
Risk taking is myth making. If I'm not ready or willing to risk something, I think there's something dead in the myth that I'm living. You can think about pushing the envelope. You can also think about tearing the envelope up. That's part of the creative life, to risk something beyond our normal measure.
What about terraforming other planets like Mars?
Oh man, the big guns. You're throwing out the big guns. Yeah, and terraforming is in the movies.
Terraforming planets is probably more fiction than science. There's a lot of things wrong with Mars.
Like Mars is like the worst place you want to go right now. Mars is like, you know, if I can compare Mars to anything, it's like going to Mount Everest, right? For like, you know, the coldest, the low pressure. And first, it's going to cost trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars. Two, we got to figure out how to keep it, right? There's no magnetic field on Mars as far as we know. So terraforming anything would just be stripped away by the solar winds.
If humans are colonizing other planets, it's probably far more likely that we're not terraforming them, is that we're living in little bubbles, and you know that's how it would. I think that would be much more likely.
Mars, I see Mars as the gas station to the next big thing, right? If I was to have an arc that would have to leave the planet, I go to Titan. Because Titan has the same atmospheric pressures as us, right? We don't need pressure suits. But it's cold, right? And it's mostly methane gas, so you wear a mask, but it's livable. And there's still magnetism there. It's a relatively young moon still. So what they're trying to do is make Mars into what Titan already is, essentially, right? So why not just take the further step and build a spacecraft big enough to just go a little to the next exit, right?
So what about after we're already living on Mars and Titan?
You know, and maybe in a couple hundred years, interstellar travel will be something of that's a possibility.
Here's Dr. Matt Kaplan to talk about his stellar engine, the Kaplan thruster, which is the most creative idea I have ever heard of.
If you have a civilization that is bottled a star, essentially, you almost have a blank check to do sci-fi things. So for example, one of the biggest risks to life is space. There are a lot of things up in the sky that could kill us, even beyond just asteroids falling from the sky. I'm talking explosions like supernova. I'm talking things like gamma ray bursts when neutron stars merge, just blasting like a laser through the universe and just scouring planets clean of life. But if you have this sci-fi blank check of the power of the sun, you can quite easily imagine using that energy to move the sun. But the basic idea is, how do you move something? Well, you need to push. And the only way to do that, the only way to get enough matter to drive a jet that would push the sun, is to collect matter from the sun. So the entire idea is built around step one, bottling the sun to collect all its energy. Step two, using some of that energy and refocusing it on the surface of the sun to blast matter off in really strong solar winds. And then lastly, using the matter that you have now recollected, that you blasted off the sun, into a really big focused jet, which you power with nuclear reactions and all your other sci-fi blank check stuff. With the amount of mass that you need to be blasting off the sun in order to actually do something, you need something big. But you don't just have to have one device. You could imagine that you have thousands or millions of them all orbiting in the same circle, like Saturn's rings, all of them collecting matter at the same time, all of them firing once in orbit as they come into position. So there's a whole bunch of different ways you could imagine doing this. Like I said, sci-fi blank check, you can, make it any way you want.
Many people are worried that they'll get an idea out walking in the woods when they don't have their phone or something, and they'll forget it. Those ideas aren't as important. It's the ones that appear and keep knocking on your head that won't let you go. That's the sticky ideas we talk about in the Creative Compass.
I think the best way to
foster creativity is to come at it from a sense of play.
Never stop playing, people.
You know, humans like more creative humans.
Keeping creative, like seeing other people's visions of their art or whatever it may be, you know, music. My number one thing for a new employee is I want you to taste everything. Because your palate might be different from my palate. I love sweet things. You might like sour things. And we all can learn together and conceptualize this, you know, this perfect dish because we all contributed together.
Creativity is fostered through mentorships, support from like teachers and parents.
And I found providing both type of supports, inspirational and instructional, can help you to improve your creativity.
In 2016, there was an article written by 2 Japanese researchers which found that copying the old masters helped the most to promote creativity.
Just exposing them to art makes a lot of people just want to do art.
Mimic, mimesis, imitating. Just imitate them. Use the energy that came out of mimicking them to carry you into your own original work.
The idea with exercise is any exercise is good, but it looks like the kind of aerobic exercise, which is good for your heart and is definitely good for your brain, absolutely, is not necessarily quite as good for positive drive and dopamine as high intensity interval training. That really boosts dopamine. And like 2 minutes of high intensity exercise, wait till your heart rate goes down below 120, take another couple minutes. Do 3 sets of those 2-minute exercises. That's way more efficient.
Fostering creativity in the demon muse model is number one, relating to it as some sort of separate force that you have a relationship with, and that is actually related to your deep destiny, your deep direction in life. And number two, doing what you need to do to if you're a pianist, play your scales. If you're a writer, do writing exercises, keep on writing, so that you are actually, through your work, creating a place where your muse, your daimonic muse, your demon muse can speak. It's almost like you invite it. You don't just sit waiting passively, you wait actively.
The way to be creative is to practice, is to keep doing stuff, usually within whatever domain you want to do. So if you want to be a writer, you write, and you write, and you write, and you read, and you share, and you get feedback.
You just do it, and you're in the moment. You're totally in the moment. But at the same time, you're in the future, you know.
Creativity is a skill you need to work at. I've seen so many people who may be more talented than I am, but aren't willing to work at whatever they're interested in creating. And if I'm willing to keep at it and keep creating things, it will keep me ahead of those people, because you just need to keep doing it, to keep practicing, keep getting better, and keep learning and coming up with new ideas, because the act of making the new ideas will eventually find some good ones.
And the best thing to do is to just keep making stuff, you know.
I think we need to create more safe spaces for people to create in, you know, and to just experiment.
When you've got time on your hands and, you know, you're just irritated by something and you're playing around with ideas, that's where you can experiment and try stuff and not die. There is some evidence that a little bit of danger is good for creativity. You know, it's just a little whiff of it that can get you going. It's just overwhelming danger, not so good.
If you listen, that's another thing about creativity. I think being especially with stand-up, like being an observer, an observant person.
Like, what are the dispositions of some creative people in everyday life? I would say they are great observers.
Being curious, wondering, and being attracted to something. Look around the world and what is it that attracts you? That's where your libidinal energy is flowing. That has its own wisdom.
Yeah, I find a lot of the time that nature can be really, really good for fostering energy and creativity. Just, you know, taking nature walks.
Well, it's funny, during the pandemic, what we did to just soothe our soul was we would go into nature, and nature helps you become creative. You let go of all that other stuff, and we do our best thinking when we're in the mountains.
There's the Japanese concept of Shinrin Yoku, or forest bathing, which is basically go take a hike in nature and you'll feel better. Remembering that nature and God are equated through Hebrew numerology, it's almost as if you could say, go take a walk through God and you'll feel better.
Beethoven got his best ideas by walking in the forest. You know, Brahms as well. Brahms would go into the mountains and go backpacking, and he said there were melodies everywhere and that he was in danger of stepping on them. The artists, the mystics, the poets have known this, that God shines through these acts of creativity. That is the bridge. Or, you know, the Greek would call it the nous, you know, that realm in between the abstract, formless, the uncreated all, and the human material world. This imaginal bridge, well, that's where art and music and poetry make visible the invisible.
You can foster creativity that way. So go out there, go be in God, go be in the Spirit, and maybe you'll get filled with inspiration. If you'd like a less spiritual or metaphysical activity to do to help you foster your creativity, here's Dr. Shelley Carson to tell us some ways we can get into a creative headspace.
One is by exercise, physical aerobic exercise. So there's a period of 30 minutes to 2 hours after physical exercise when you're in this state. A second way is right before you go to sleep or right after you awaken. You may have very fertile ideas. A third way is spending time in nature, preferably walking in nature alone, so that you can let ideas percolate and synthesize. Other ways are through open meditation or a what's called an openness meditation, where you're not using a mantra or something to focus on, you're just using open awareness.
So I want everyone watching here to go out there and create. Go invent the cure for the next pandemic. Write the next great novel that will be read and analyzed for decades to come. Go write that poem that will break hearts with its truth. Synthesize 2 areas of science for the next big breakthrough. Go play a song to lift people's spirits. Just go create. Go, right now.
Creatives keep creating. You know, this can be a long, difficult, sometimes lonely journey, but it's always worth it. It's always worth it. So keep creating in whatever capacity works for you.
apathy is real, and I'm hearing you from the vast belly of blackness. Your reality comes through. What you don't know will kill you someday. What you don't fear will raise its head. Who killed your hope? Sent you a doctor who did not speak the language, who did not come to heal you, only to feel good about himself. Standing up high in a short room, crushed by the want to be taught. Who gave you the legs to stand on? Pull back the curtain and laugh as you fell. Boy, it did not come to save them, only to save himself on the day comet came. On the day the comet came. On the day and what you don't feel will kill you someday. And what you don't say is gonna make you explode. And who broke your heart? And started sending love notes in the mail.
My idea for doing this documentary woke me up at 4 a.m.
It really, like, it's always like around like that time.